Pack your things and be out by Friday. My wife feels uncomfortable having you in our home. My son-in-law said it to my face, arms crossed, chin raised like he was doing me a favor by giving me 4 days. My daughter stood 3 feet behind him, staring at the floor. I said nothing. I nodded once, walked to my room, and started making phone calls. He had no idea that the man he'd just evicted had $11 million sitting quietly in a private account, and that I'd been waiting 2 years for him to say exactly that. The oncologist's office smelled like recycled air and worry. I sat in a paperback chair while Dr. Marlowe, a measured woman in her late 40s, reviewed my chart with the calm of someone who delivered difficult news many times before. Prostate cancer, early stage, caught during a routine screening. Her exact words: highly treatable, excellent prognosis, 5-year survival rate above 94%. She said I'd likely be managing my garden long after most men my age retired from gardening. I drove home their home listening to the radio. The diagnosis sat in my coat pocket, folded into a manila envelope alongside a collection of lab values that most people would find incomprehensible. I'd spent 31 years in pharmaceutical distribution. I understood every number on that page. What I understood more clearly was what would happen when I shared the news at dinner that evening. I wanted to see their faces. I needed to. 2 years ago, I'd sold Walker Hartley Distribution, a pharmaceutical supply company I'd built from a regional delivery route in 1991, into a mid-size operation covering 7 southwestern states, to a private equity group out of Dallas for $9 million. I paid the taxes, moved what remained into a combination of municipal bonds, index funds, and 3 high-performing REITs, and watched the balance grow while I played the role of a retired grandfather who'd simplified his life down to a modest pension and a Social Security check. My daughter, Claire, had called me that April. Her voice carried the particular tension she reserved for requests she knew pushed boundaries. Dad, Derek, and I found a house in Arcadia. 4 bedrooms, good school district, but we're $40,000 short on the down payment. We've already maxed our pre-approval. I drove to their apartment the next morning with a check for $60,000, handed it to her in an envelope, and told her I'd scraped together everything I could, from liquidating what little remained from selling the business. I watched gratitude fill her face, real gratitude, in that moment. Derek shook my hand and said he didn't know how to thank me. I told him to make a good home. 2 months later, they suggested I move in. Derek framed it as generosity. Dad, you're rattling around in that apartment. We have the extra room. Save on rent. Spend time with the grandkids. What Claire didn't say, what I suspected from the beginning, was that my $2,500 a month in household contributions had factored significantly into that invitation. They accepted my cash every month the way people accept utility bills. Expected, processed, filed. Never discussed with gratitude. I'd moved into the guest room adjacent to the garage. Functional, clean, the smallest room in a 4-bedroom house in one of Phoenix's better neighborhoods. Every morning I heard Derek's espresso machine in the kitchen, heard my daughter's voice organizing the day, heard my grandchildren, Emma, 9 years old with her mother's quick mind, and Tyler, 7, who approached life like a gentle collision moving through the rooms. I made myself useful. I helped with school pickup 3 days a week. I fixed the irrigation system in the backyard. I kept quiet during Derek's long calls in the home office, his voice carrying through the thin wall between us. At dinner that Tuesday, I set the envelope beside my plate and told them about the diagnosis. Prostate cancer, early stage, very manageable. The doctor was optimistic. I said each word clearly and watched their faces. Claire reached for my hand. Oh, Dad. Her eyes went wide with something that looked like fear, though I couldn't be certain whether it was fear for me or fear of the inconvenience. Derek asked one question. Is it serious? I said the doctors were confident with treatment. He nodded, picked up his fork, and asked Claire about the quote she'd received for the new kitchen backsplash. The subject of my diagnosis closed like a window. Emma, across the table, had not looked away from me. She was 9 and already understood more about silence than most adults. Are you scared, Grandpa? No, sweetheart. I smiled at her. I've handled harder things than this. Tyler said nothing, just reached over and patted my arm twice with his small hand. Children notice what adults choose not to. That night, I lay in the guest room and listened to the house settle around me. Through the wall, I could hear Derek's voice, low and deliberate, the particular cadence he used when he thought he was being careful. "I'm not asking you to be heartless, Claire. I'm asking you to think practically. If this gets serious, if he needs care, that's a whole different situation than what we signed up for. And the money he contributes doesn't cover half of what it costs to have him here. You know that." My daughter's response was too quiet to hear. I stood in the dark, hand on the door, decided to stay. 3 weeks later, Derek asked to speak with me privately. He stood in the kitchen doorway on a Saturday morning when Claire had taken the kids to a birthday party. He crossed his arms and told me directly, without anger, but without softness, that given my health situation, given the complexity of having an aging parent in the home, he and Claire thought it would be better for everyone if I found my own living arrangement. He said my doctor had probably recommended a calmer environment anyway. He said I should look at some of the nice senior apartments in the Scottsdale area. He gave me until Friday. I thanked him. I went to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and opened my phone to the private banking application I'd never shown anyone in this household. 11,243,000, and some change in interest that accumulated daily. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and picked up a different one. I scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 8 months. Arthur Pennington answered on the second ring. "Art," I said, "I need you to walk me through something." Arthur was the real estate attorney who'd handled every major property transaction I'd completed over 30 years. He listened without interrupting while I explained what I needed. When I finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. "How quickly do you want to move?" I told him I had until Friday. He said to give him until Tuesday. I spent Sunday and Monday mornings driving through neighborhoods, while Derek worked and Claire drove the children to school. I'd spent enough time in the Phoenix metro to know where I wanted to be. Paradise Valley was beautiful but too isolated. Old Town Scottsdale felt performative. I circled back to a neighborhood called Shea Corridor, established streets, tall eucalyptus trees, homes built for living rather than displaying. A listing caught my attention on Tuesday morning. Warm stucco exterior, iron gate, covered patio, overlooking a private courtyard, 3 bedrooms with a dedicated home office. Listed at $690,000. Vacant for 3 weeks. Sellers already relocated to Seattle. I met Arthur's colleague, a real estate agent named Veronica, at the property at 2 in the afternoon. She walked me through the rooms while I asked measured questions about the electrical panel, the HVAC system, the age of the roof. She answered each one thoroughly. Halfway through the tour, I stopped in the main room where light fell through a row of south-facing windows and told her I'd like to submit an offer that afternoon. Full asking price, all cash. She blinked twice. "Are you?" "Yes, absolutely. Let me make some calls." Arthur handled the paperwork. 5 days from offer to keys. The sellers were motivated. I was uncomplicated. The deal moved the way deals move when no one is waiting on a bank. On Thursday evening, I typed a note on the small notepad I kept in my nightstand drawer. I wrote it twice. The first draft was too pointed. The second one landed correctly. "Thank you for opening your home. I've secured my own place and will be out before 9 tomorrow morning. As promised, here is this month's contribution. I hope your new kitchen comes together exactly as you planned." I folded the note around $300 bills and left it on the kitchen table before 5 a.m. beside a cup of coffee I'd made and left to cool. The movers arrived at 6, 2 professionals, precise and efficient. I'd lived out of half-unpacked boxes for 2 years, which I'd done deliberately. Moving day was simple. By 8:15, everything I owned was in a truck heading toward Shea Corridor. I locked the guest room door behind me, slid the key under it, and walked out through the garage. Derek's truck was still in the driveway when I left. He didn't come out. My new kitchen had a window that faced east and caught the morning light directly. I made coffee in it for the first time that Friday and stood in the quiet for nearly an hour without doing anything else. The text arrived from Derek at 11:17. "Got your note. Hope everything works out." 9 words. Claire sent a separate message 20 minutes later. "Dad, call me when you can. I want to make sure you're okay." I read it twice and put the phone down. I spent the first week unpacking carefully, choosing where things belonged. I'd owned enough property to understand that how you arrange a home tells you something about how you intend to live in it. I put my desk near the east window. I placed a photograph of Emma and Tyler on the bookshelf where I'd see it from the desk chair. I started taking my medication every morning at 7, exactly as prescribed. The prostate cancer was responding to treatment the way the doctor had expected. I felt fine. Better than fine, actually. My phone showed 31 missed calls by day 8. Claire had called 19 times. Derek, 11 times. One call from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Jennifer Albright, Claire's mother-in-law, a woman who'd always treated me with careful warmth at holiday dinners. I didn't return any of them. On day 10, I called Susan Reeves. I'd worked with Susan 12 years earlier when I structured the original sale of my distribution business's smaller subsidiary. She was 60 now, with an office in downtown Phoenix, and the precise, unrushed manner of someone who had never needed to oversell her own competence. She answered immediately. "Harold, it's been a long time." I told her what I needed. She was quiet long enough that I heard her set something down on her desk. "When can you come in?" I arrived at her office the next morning with a portfolio of documents. Investment statements, the deed for the Shea Corridor house, bank records going back to the sale of Walker Hartley Distribution, and a folder I'd carried from the guest room without ever opening in front of them. Susan reviewed the investment portfolio first and didn't change her expression. Then she looked at the deed, the bank records, and finally the folder I'd placed at the bottom of the stack. I want my daughter and son-in-law to understand the scope of what I have, not as a threat, as information they should have had before they made the decisions they made. Susan nodded slowly. "And the document at the bottom? I'd prepared it 2 years ago, the week before I moved into their guest room. A promissory note, signed by my daughter and co-signed by Derek at a kitchen table when I handed over the $60,000 check for their down payment. They'd both signed without reading carefully. The note read as follows: $60,000 in principal, 6% annual interest, 5-year term, with an acceleration clause allowing me to call the full balance due at any point with 90 days' notice if I determined the loan to be at risk. I should note that at the signing, I'd verbally described it as standard paperwork for my own tax records. My daughter had laughed and said, "Dad, you're so organized." Derek had signed where I indicated and asked no questions. I had said nothing false. I had simply not corrected their assumption. Susan read the document twice. The total due, principal plus 2 years of compounded interest, came to $68,400 and some dollars. "I want to invoke the acceleration clause," I told her. She nodded, made a note, and said she'd prepare the demand letter. 3 days later, Derek signed for a certified envelope at their front door. Susan had told me he'd stood on the porch for a long moment before going inside. Claire called within the hour, 19 times in 4 hours. Derek called 11 times in the same window. I watched the screen light up from across my home office and did not move. At 6 in the evening, I heard a car slow on my street. Through the window, I watched Derek's SUV park across from my property. He got out and stood looking at the iron gate, the stucco facade, the covered courtyard. Claire got out a moment later. She stood beside him with her hand at her mouth. I buttoned my collar, checked my reflection. The man looking back at me had gained back 7 pounds he'd lost in 2 years of careful smallness. I looked like myself. The doorbell rang. I waited, answered. They stood at the gate. Derek had the controlled expression of a man who'd rehearsed this. Claire looked like she hadn't slept. "Dad," she said, "please, can we talk?" I said nothing, kept my hands in my pockets and waited. Derek spoke first. "Harold, we clearly didn't understand the full picture. We had no idea you were in this position financially. If we'd known," I stopped him there. The gate stayed closed between us. "If you'd known, Derek, I want you to think carefully about what you're saying. You're telling me your behavior would have been different if you'd known about my bank account. Is that the lesson you want to be teaching?" He had the intelligence to look ashamed. Claire stepped forward. "The demand letter. The 68,000. We don't have that. You know we don't. Our savings aren't anywhere close." "I know exactly what you have," I said. "I've known your financial situation for 2 years. That's information I gathered while living in your guest room on my own money." She flinched. "I gave you a week to pack when you were sick." My daughter's voice broke on the last word. Derek started to speak and I raised one hand. I heard everything you said. I was in the hallway. Your husband's exact words to you were, "The old man is using up room we need and contributing to costs he doesn't actually cover." And you agreed with him. So did I, actually. I was using your room, and now I'm not. We all got what we wanted. Claire reached through the gate bars and I stepped back once, gently, firmly. No more automatic access. No more assumption of welcome. This is your house now, I said. I'll come in when I'm invited properly, and when I choose to accept that invitation. Derek cleared his throat. What do you want from us, Harold? The money? Because we can try to arrange something. A payment plan. Whatever you need. What I need? I said. I've already arranged. I moved my accounts, secured my property, updated my estate planning. My attorney handles my affairs. What happens with that promissory note is her business and mine. He looked past me at the house, the courtyard, the kind of property that announces its own value without trying. I could see him doing the arithmetic. Claire was crying now, quietly, the kind that doesn't perform itself. Dad, she said, I'm so sorry. I let Derek tell you to leave. I should have protected you. You're my father. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. The girl who'd called me from her college dorm at 2 a.m. when she'd failed her first exam. Certain her life was finished. The woman I'd walked down the aisle 7 years ago and thought, I hope he deserves her. I'm not sure he has yet. Go home, I said. Think about what you want to say when you've had time to mean it. Then we can have a real conversation. They went back to their car. Derek drove. Claire sat rigid in the passenger seat, face turned toward her window. I poured a glass of water in my kitchen and stood at the east window in the dark. The demand letter had set a 90-day deadline, which I had stretched deliberately to 120, based on Susan's quiet suggestion that 90 might create an impossible situation that collapsed into bankruptcy faster than I wanted. I wasn't interested in destroying them. I was interested in consequence meeting action at a speed slow enough to be felt, but not so fast it became only catastrophe. They began selling things within 2 weeks. Susan's network was active enough that I received occasional reports without asking for them. Designer furniture appeared on Facebook Marketplace. A motorcycle Derek had purchased 2 years ago went on Craigslist. Claire's photography equipment, which she'd used once for a side project that never materialized, listed on eBay. Each item priced at a discount that said, "We need this gone quickly." Their mortgage on the Arcadia house ran $4,400 a month. Derek's income as a regional sales director was reasonable, but not elastic. Claire's part-time consulting work covered small expenses. The math was tight before. Now it was punishing. At 4 weeks, they'd gathered $31,000. At 6 weeks, 44. Still 24,000 short, with 60 days remaining. I received a voicemail from Emma's school counselor in week 5. She left a careful message. Emma had been having some difficulty concentrating, seemed withdrawn, mentioned her grandfather several times. The counselor asked, gently, whether everything was okay with the family. I called back the next morning and spoke with her directly. I told her Emma's grandfather was fine, that the family was going through a transition, that I appreciated the attention. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for 20 minutes without moving. The photograph of Emma and Tyler on my bookshelf had been taken on Thanksgiving, the year before I moved in. Tyler was 4, still young enough to be unself-conscious about climbing into laps. Emma was 7, already beginning to understand that photographs were occasions. They were both laughing at something outside the frame. I called Susan that evening. I want to modify the terms, I said. I want to give them a path that works. She listened. Then she said, on what conditions? I told her. Claire and Derek sat across from me in Susan's conference room on a Thursday afternoon. Claire wore no makeup, and her eyes showed the particular puffiness of someone who'd been crying at intervals for weeks. Derek's suit was right, but his posture was wrong. He was a man trying to appear steady while sitting inside a collapse. Susan had arranged the documents on the table with the precision she brought to everything. I looked at my daughter first. Claire, I want to ask you one question, and I need you to answer it honestly. Are you here because you're sorry, or because you can't make the payment? She pressed her lips together. Both. I won't lie to you. But mostly the first. I miss my father. I miss you coming to school pickup. I miss Emma talking about you at dinner. Derek talked me into something I should have refused, and I chose my marriage over you, and I have not stopped feeling sick about it since the night you left." Her voice held steady through all of it. Derek watched the table. "Derek," I said. "Your turn." He exhaled. "I treated you like a liability. You came to us in good faith when we asked you. You contributed to our household every month. You helped with our children, and I looked at you and saw a burden instead of family." He paused. "That says something about who I've become that I'm not proud of. I'm not going to tell you I'm fixed, but I'm telling you it's the most honest accounting I have right now." I slid the document Susan had prepared across the table. "These are my terms. The $44,000 you've collected is paid to me. Consider it the tuition for what's happened. The remaining $24,000 I forgive. The loan closes there. Second, you enter couples therapy. Minimum 6 months. Weekly. Not to save your marriage. I don't presume to know what your marriage needs, but because the two of you made decisions together that cost someone who trusted you. That deserves examination. Third, my estate has been updated. The majority goes to a charitable foundation and an irrevocable trust for Emma and Tyler, with access at 25. You receive $100,000 total between you. That is not a negotiation point. Fourth, I set the schedule for how I see my grandchildren. That access is mine to define, not yours to grant as a favor." Derek read through the document carefully this time. Every line. I watched him do it. When he finished, he looked up. "And if we agree to all of this, then you have a father again," I said. "One who knows exactly who you are and has chosen, with that knowledge, to maintain a relationship. That is worth more than anything else on that table." Claire signed first. Derek signed without hesitating. Whatever relief I'd expected to feel arrived quieter than I anticipated. More like setting something heavy down than like winning anything. That evening I sat on my covered patio as the Arizona sun went down behind the eucalyptus trees at the edge of my courtyard. The desert air carried a faint smell of creosote and something blooming nearby. I'd read about the neighborhood online before moving in, established in the 80s, modest by Paradise Valley standards, the kind of street where people stayed for decades. A neighbor had waved at me twice that week from across the street. I hadn't introduced myself yet, but planned to. Susan had called before I left her office to confirm that the grandchildren's trust was already filed with the court. $2 million. Accessible at 25. Untouchable by their parents, under any circumstance. Derek had asked, as he was signing the acknowledgement form, whether there was any condition under which he or Claire might access those funds before the children came of age. Susan had answered in 2 words. He nodded and signed. Emma called me on a Saturday morning 3 weeks later, from Claire's phone. She said she'd asked her mother to dial. She said Tyler wanted to say hello too, and then the phone changed hands, and Tyler said, "Hi, Grandpa," very quickly and handed it back. "Emma," I said, "would you and your brother like to come see my new house? I have a courtyard with a lemon tree. We can make lemonade, and then I'll teach you both to play chess if you want." She said yes immediately. Tyler shouted yes from somewhere in the background. I picked them up the following Saturday. Claire met me at the door with an expression I recognized, the one she'd worn when she was 12 years old and had broken a lamp, and finally told me the truth about it. I didn't hug her. I wasn't ready for that yet, but I nodded at her in a way that meant, "We are still finding our way to something." She nodded back. In my kitchen that Saturday, Tyler was already convinced the lemon tree was the best thing he'd ever seen, and wanted to know if he could climb it. I said no, but that he could pick any lemon he could reach from the ground. He picked 4, very seriously. Emma helped me juice them while I measured sugar and water, and she asked me, in the careful voice she used when she'd been thinking about something for a long time, "Grandpa, are we going to see you every week now?" "Every week is a lot of weeks," I told her. "But we can see each other regularly. I'd like that." She seemed to be checking whether that was a real answer. Then she nodded. "Okay, that works." We played 2 games of chess. She lost the first and won the second because I made one deliberate mistake at the end, and she saw it and took full advantage. She didn't know I'd let her, and I didn't tell her. Some lessons land better when they feel unassisted. I started mentoring through a small business development nonprofit in September. Tuesday and Thursday mornings downtown, working with entrepreneurs in the early stages of building something. Young people, mostly, who'd had an idea long enough to act on it, but not long enough to know what would break and what would hold. I recognized the particular exhaustion and focus of people who were building rather than managing. I'd been that person once, back when Walker Hartley was still a single delivery route, and I was making calls from a phone mounted to my truck's dashboard. My cancer treatment continued on schedule. The numbers moved in the right direction. Doctor, Marlowe said at my 6-month appointment that she was very pleased with how I was responding. I told her I was sleeping better than I had in 2 years. She said that probably helped. I agreed that it probably did. In October, Claire and I had coffee at a place near her house, just the two of us. We sat with our cups and talked for a while about small things. Emma's school project, Tyler's new obsession with building things, a documentary Claire had watched about the history of Arizona waterways that she'd thought I would find interesting. At some point, she said, without preamble, "I know you may not fully forgive us. I know there are things I can't undo. I just want you to know that I understand now what I was willing to let happen to you, and I'm not that person anymore. Or I'm working not to be." I told her I appreciated that what mattered going forward was consistency over time, that I was watching and I was open, and that was the most I could promise, honestly. She said, "That's enough. That's more than I deserve." We sat for another half hour and didn't need to say much more. By December, my routine had the shape of a life I'd chosen entirely on my own terms. Morning medication, coffee, an hour at my desk before the mentor sessions twice a week. Saturday afternoons with Emma and Tyler, who had both decided chess was their new competitive sport and argued amiably about who had improved more. Occasional dinners with a former colleague from my distribution days who'd retired to Scottsdale. A standing Sunday morning call with my brother in Denver, who'd known about the account all along and had kept the secret for 2 years with the patience of someone who understood exactly why it was necessary. One evening in December, I sat at my desk with 2 photographs in front of me. The first was old Emma and Tyler at Thanksgiving, laughing at something outside the frame. The second was new, taken at my courtyard the Saturday we'd made lemonade. Emma held her glass with both hands, and Tyler was already halfway through his, and the lemon tree behind them was small but growing. The trust documents were filed. The estate was updated. The house was paid for and entirely mine. My medical chart showed a man who was responding well to treatment and had good years ahead of him. The relationships I'd chosen to maintain were being maintained on my terms, with the knowledge on all sides of exactly what they'd cost to nearly lose. I'd spent 2 years in a small room playing a role to answer a question. The question was answered. What came after was harder and quieter and more real. My son-in-law had told me to be out by Friday. I'd been out before 9, and the man who'd walked out of that house in Arcadia was not the careful, diminished version who'd moved in 2 years earlier. He was 64 years old, in treatment for a manageable cancer, living in a house he'd bought for cash in a neighborhood with tall eucalyptus trees. He had $11 million and grandchildren who argued about chess and a daughter who was trying to become someone worth knowing again. I locked my gate each night and slept without sound in a bed I'd chosen in a room that was exactly the size I wanted. That was enough. That was, in fact, considerably more than enough. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to Real Revenge Stories, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done differently? I read every single one,